Okay, let's unpack this. Welcome to a deep dive.
Glad to be here.
We are plunging into something incredibly relevant to all of us,
Yeah.
stress.
Right.
Not just that anxious feeling before a deadline, but the profound ways our bodies and brains react. What happens when stress becomes traumatic, and even the possibility of, well, growth emerging from the struggle.
And you give us a fantastic map for this exploration.
Yeah.
A collection of sources covering really everything from the nuts and bolts of your nervous and endocrine systems to specific brain regions and concepts like PTSD and the compelling idea of post-traumatic growth.
Absolutely. Think of this deep dive as us going through that material together,
Yeah.
pulling out the really crucial pieces, the aha
Yeah.
moments, to understand this complex dance between our biology and our experience of stress.
From that split-second jolt of surprise
Right.
to the long-term impacts and even potential positive changes.
So to really ground us, let's start with something instantly relatable that was highlighted in the sources. Imagine you're sound asleep, it's the middle of the night, quiet, and then suddenly, bam! A loud noise hits your window.
Oh, yeah.
What happens in that instant, that surge of adrenaline, that racing heart?
That's the opening scene, really, of the biological story we're going to explore.
So where does that jolt even come from? Our sources rightly point us to the body's incredible wiring network, the nervous system.
It's a superhighway for information, yeah.
Broadly, it's split into the central nervous system, your brain and spinal cord, kind of the command center.
By the CNS.
And the peripheral nervous system, all the nerves that branch out everywhere else.
Yeah.
The PNS.
Exactly. The central nervous system is where the processing power is. And within the brain, several key areas are crucial for our stress response.
Okay.
Down at the base, you have the brainstem, handling essential life support functions without you even thinking about it. Breathing, heart rate.
Right, the automatic stuff. And just above that is a region called the diencephalon. Two parts here are critical, aren't they?
Yeah, the thalamus and hypothalamus.
The thalamus acts like a central relay station for sensory information coming into the brain. Your sources mention it's involved in gating, essentially amplifying important signals.
That's a good way to put it, like that loud bang. The thalamus makes sure you hear it loud and clear, maybe even pulling you out of sleep. It decides what gets through.
And right next to it, the hypothalamus. Your sources pinpoint this as a key control center, particularly for the fight or flight response.
Definitely. It's also involved in things like regulating body temperature, hunger, thirst homeostasis, keeping your internal environment stable.
Then there's the massive outer layer, the cerebral hemispheres, what we often just think of as the brain, the neocortex. This is where you have conscious awareness, where you process what that bang might mean, where memory and thought happen, the higher level stuff.
And hidden deep within those hemispheres are structures vital for emotion and memory, part of what's known as the limbic system. The amygdala, for instance.
Yes, the amygdala.
Is described as being heavily involved in emotional responses, especially fear and anxiety. It's constantly scanning for threats, kind of like a smoke detector.
So when the thalamus sends up that loud signal from the window, the amygdala is one of the first places that gets activated.
Pretty much. It immediately flags it as potentially dangerous.
Okay. And meanwhile, the hippocampus is working on memory.
Right. It helps encode long-term memories and, importantly, adds context to emotional responses.
That context piece sounds huge.
It is. Your sources use a great example. Encountering a snake.
Right.
The amygdala screams, danger. But if your hippocampus adds the context, oh, this is at the zoo behind thick glass, it helps dampen that fear response.
But if the context is, I'm on a hiking trail.
Exactly. Then the hippocampus reinforces the amygdala's danger signal, preparing you to act. Context is everything.
The sources also mention the reticular formation, this network running through the brainstem. What's its role?
The RF. It plays a big role in arousal, waking you up and keeping you alert when there's a potential threat.
So it helps send signals both upwards to make you conscious.
Downwards to prepare your body. Yeah. Connects things.
And this all works together, not just step by step, but through multiple brain regions processing information simultaneously.
Yes, that concept called parallel distributed processing that the sources touch on. The brain is incredibly networked.
Okay, so that's the command center, the CNS. But how does the brain tell your muscles to tense or your heart to pound?
That's the peripheral nervous system coming into play. One part is the somatic nervous system.
Somatic. That handles voluntary movement, right?
Yeah.
Talking to your skeletal muscles, skin, sense organs.
Precisely. Think of the classic finger touches flame example from the sources.
Oh, yeah.
Sensory nerves zip the pain signal up to your spinal cord and brain.
Afferent pathways.
Right. And motor nerves, the efferent pathways, immediately send the command back. Yank your hand away.
Got it. And during fight or flight, the somatic system gets your muscles ready for action, tense and prepared.
Which is protective in the moment, absolutely. But your sources highlight that if this somatic activation stays on high alert, chronic muscle tension, it can lead to persistent issues like tension headaches or back pain, bruxism, things like that.
Right, the downsides of long-term activation.
Yeah.
Okay, what's the other crucial part of the peripheral nervous system?
That would be the autonomic nervous system. This one operates mostly without your conscious control.
Autonomic, automatic, okay.
Yeah, it manages your internal organs, your heart, lungs, digestion, glands, the inner workings.
And this is where we find the two famous branches with opposite functions.
Exactly. The sympathetic branch, which ramps things up for fight or flight,
Energizing.
and the parasympathetic branch, which calms things down for rest and digest.
Restoring.
The sources give us that clever way to remember this. Sympathetic starts with S, like snake.
Oh. If a snake is coming after you, your sympathetic system takes over.
Perfect. And parasympathetic starts with P, like pudding.
Huh. Okay, after a big meal of pudding, you want to relax and digest. That's parasympathetic at work. Got it.
So when the sympathetic system kicks in during fight or flight, your sources list some pretty dramatic effects.
Yeah, like pupils dilate, letting in more light.
Bronchial tubes open wide for more oxygen.
Heart rate and pumping strength increase.
Blood gets shunted away from digestion towards the big muscles.
Sweat glands activate.
And key hormones get released. We'll get to those. It's a full body mobilization.
While the parasympathetic system does the opposite, promoting things like digestion when you're relaxed.
Precisely. So back to that bang on the window.
Okay, tying it together.
Your thalamus screams alert. The amygdala flags danger. The hypothalamus and RF send the general alarm. And the sympathetic nervous system immediately triggers those physical changes. Racing heart, tense muscles, ready to go.
That's the nervous system's instant reaction. Quick and powerful.
But what happens if the threat doesn't vanish immediately? Or maybe the stress is ongoing, like work pressure?
Right, it's not always a sudden bang.
Exactly. The body has another system that works hand in hand with the nervous system to keep that alert going or to manage longer-term demands. That's the endocrine system.
Ah, the hormonal system.
These are your glands and organs that secrete hormones directly into the bloodstream.
So it's chemical messengers, not electrical signals like nerves.
Right, which means it's generally slower to start than the nervous system's response.
Okay.
But the hormonal effects tend to last much longer.
Ah, I see. Persistence.
Your sources detail a few key hormonal pathways, or axes, activated during stress, starting with the Sympathetic-Adrenal-Medulla axis, the SAM axis.
Okay, Sam, how does that work?
The hypothalamus, that command center we talked about, signals the sympathetic nervous system, which in turn directly stimulates the inner part of your adrenal glands, the adrenal medulla. These sit on top of your kidneys.
Adrenal medulla.
Okay.
And what does it release?
It pumps epinephrine and norepinephrine into your bloodstream. You probably know them better as adrenaline and noradrenaline.
Ah, right. The classic stress hormones.
Think of these as the body's quick-acting, powerful fuel. They boost heart rate, push blood to muscles, open airways.
Sounds a lot like the sympathetic nervous system effects.
They reinforce and amplify those effects, yeah. And importantly, they trigger the release of glucose from storage for quick energy.
Fuel for the fight or flight.
Exactly. The sources mention an interesting association too. Epinephrine, often linked more with the physical feelings of fear, while norepinephrine is perhaps more tied to anger or vigilance.
Interesting nuance. Okay, what's the next axis?
Then there's the Hypothalamic-Pituitary-Adrenal axis, the HPA axis. This one is a bit more complex, involves more steps.
HPA, right.
Again, the hypothalamus starts things off. It sends a signal, a releasing factor, down to the pituitary gland.
The master gland at the base of the brain.
That's the one. The pituitary gland then releases a hormone called ACTH.
ACTH.
Which travels through the bloodstream down to the outer part of the adrenal glands. The adrenal cortex this time.
So SAM was the inner medulla. HPI targets the outer cortex.
You got it. And the adrenal cortex is told by ACTH to release cortisol.
Cortisol. Probably the most famous stress hormone, right?
Definitely the one people talk about most. It has widespread effects. It helps maintain those increased glucose levels for sustained energy. It fine-tunes metabolism, can actually sharpen certain types of memory initially, like remembering the threat.
Makes sense.
Increases the thalamus's sensitivity to sensory input, and even has anti-inflammatory effects in the short term.
So it really readies the body in multiple ways. And both physical danger and psychological stress kick up cortisol.
They do. The sources also mention the pituitary-releasing beta endorphin, along with ACTH.
Endorphins,
They
like
are.
natural painkillers.
Exactly. Offers a bit of pain relief, pretty handy if you're injured while fleeing a threat.
Absolutely. Okay, so we have SAM and HPA. Is there another key one?
The sources mention one more relevant axis, the thyroxine axis.
Thyroxine,
Yeah.
related to the thyroid gland.
Yes. Similar pathway pattern.
Yeah.
Hypothalamus signals the pituitary, which releases TSH, thyroid-stimulating hormone, which travels to the thyroid gland in your neck,
Hooray.
prompting the thyroid to release thyroxine.
And what does thyroxine do in terms of stress?
Its main effect is to significantly boost your overall metabolic rate, essentially speeding up all your body's processes. It can even double it.
Wow, double speed.
What's unique about thyroxine, as your sources point out, is it has a bit of a latent period before it fully kicks in.
So it's not immediate.
No.
Yeah.
And its effects last a long time in your body compared to, say, epinephrine.
Days.
Wow. Which helps explain why even after the immediate stressor is gone, you might still feel keyed up, have trouble sleeping, feel generally wired or agitated.
That lingering thyroxine keeping your system running hot, that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, the sources list symptoms like nervousness, insomnia, increased respiration, sweating, tiredness, but wired. It's that prolonged metabolic boost.
So you really see how these different systems, the rapid neural network and the slower but lasting hormonal systems, work together.
Absolutely. The nervous system gives you that instant, urgent alert.
The immediate jolt.
And the endocrine system provides the sustained readiness needed to deal with a threat that persists, or the after effects.
It's an incredibly coordinated, though sometimes exhausting biological symphony.
Well put. Now, not all stress is the same, right? And your sources make a crucial distinction when talking about traumatic stress.
Right. This is different from everyday pressure.
These are events defined in the sources as potentially leading to feelings of intense terror, fright, or helplessness. Things like combat, natural disasters, serious accidents, violence, the sudden, unexpected death of a loved one.
Events that overwhelm our usual coping capacity.
And critically, how we react isn't purely biological. The sources highlight the subjective nature of trauma.
Meaning how we perceive it matters.
Exactly. It's filtered through our personal belief system, our worldview. And traumatic events can fundamentally challenge or even shatter our core assumptions about the world being safe, predictable, or fair.
That sense of basic security can be broken.
For some people, this experience, this shattering, can lead to post-traumatic stress disorder, or PTSD.
PTSD. What are the hallmarks?
The sources characterize it by a few key symptom clusters. Re-experiencing the trauma, like flashbacks or nightmares, actively avoiding things that remind you of it, emotional numbness or detachment, and being stuck in a state of high alert or arousal.
That constant on-edge feeling.
And based on the material you provided, a key area where we see significant impact in PTSD is the limbic system.
Those emotional and memory centers in the brain we discussed earlier, the amygdala, hippocampus.
Exactly. The sources describe some consistent findings here. For instance, the amygdala, that threat detector, often appears hyper-responsive in PTSD. It's like the alarm system is stuck on super sensitivity.
Overreacting to things.
Overreacting to non-threatening cues, potentially.
Yeah.
Triggering that fear response too easily, too often.
And that makes so much sense when you think about PTSD symptoms like hypervigilance, being constantly on guard.
Right. Or having an exaggerated startle response to sudden noises, feeling irritable.
It's that overactive amygdala driving those feelings.
But interestingly, other areas seem to show the opposite pattern, reduced activity.
Like which ones?
The anterior cingulate cortex, the ACC, which is involved in regulating emotions and putting the brakes on fear responses.
Okay, emotional control.
And the hippocampus, important for memory context. These often appear hypo-responsive in PTSD.
Hypo-responsive? Underreacting.
Yeah, they're not doing their job as effectively, it seems.
So if the ACC isn't effectively dampening fear, that could explain why traumatic fear responses linger instead of fading over time.
That's one leading hypothesis, yes. The fear doesn't get extinguished properly.
And a hypo-responsive hippocampus. How does that connect to symptoms?
This really helps understand some challenging PTSD symptoms. Take flashbacks, for example.
Reliving the trauma as if it's happening right now.
Right. The hippocampus isn't effectively encoding the memory with a clear timestamp and context like, that happened then, it's over now, it feels current.
Wow. Or the car backfiring example from the sources.
Exactly. Instead of the hippocampus adding the context, that's just a car, The sound triggers the same raw fear response as the original gunshot or explosion. The context isn't applied to dampen the fear.
That lack of context is crucial.
The sources also mention research observing potentially smaller physical size in the ACC and hippocampus in people with PTSD.
Smaller size. Does that cause PTSD or is it a result?
That's the big question. Some research suggests smaller hippocampus size might even be a pre-existing risk factor, making someone more vulnerable after trauma. But teasing out cause and effect there is really complex. It's an active area of research.
What's encouraging, though, is the point made that as people recover from PTSD, say with effective therapy, you often see shifts in this brain activity, like reduced amygdala response and increased activity in the ACC and hippocampus.
That's right. It really underscores the link between these brain changes and the symptoms people experience, and suggests these changes aren't necessarily permanent. The brain can adapt.
So that's the profound biological and psychological impact traumatic stress can have, deeply affecting these core brain systems.
It really is. But your sources also introduce another side of the coin, one that offers, well, a different perspective on the aftermath of adversity.
Post-traumatic growth.
Exactly, PTG.
This is a truly fascinating concept. The sources are careful to note that while, yes, some people develop PTSD.
A minority, actually.
Right. Many others don't, and a certain percentage actually report experiencing positive changes because of going through a traumatic event and the struggle that followed.
It's not saying the trauma itself is good, obviously.
No, absolutely not.
But that growth can emerge from the process of grappling with it.
And the sources outline 3 main areas where this growth is often reported. What's the first one?
First, relationships are often strengthened. People report feeling more connected to others, maybe more compassionate, or having a deeper sense of gratitude for the people in their lives.
Deeper connections. What's second?
Second, there's often a shift in self-perception. Survivors might report feeling a greater sense of personal strength, resilience, confidence in their ability to handle future challenges.
Like, I got through that. I can handle this.
Sort of, yeah. Sometimes alongside a deeper acceptance of their own vulnerabilities or limitations, too. A more nuanced self-view.
Okay. And the third area?
And third, changes in worldview and life philosophy. This can look like a greater appreciation for life itself, maybe savoring small things more, a clearer sense of priorities, what really matters, or perhaps discovering new meaning and purpose in life.
Finding meaning. That brings to mind Viktor Frankl.
Yes, a powerful historical example highlighted in your sources. A neurologist and psychiatrist who survived Nazi concentration camps.
His work, logotherapy, is centered on that idea, right? Finding meaning even in immense suffering.
Precisely. He wrote about how even when facing unimaginable horror and circumstances you absolutely cannot change, you still retain the freedom to devise your attitude, your internal response, how you find meaning in it.
The sources share a poignant detail from his experience.
Yeah, about how even while doing brutal forced labor, he could find solace and connection by intensely thinking of his wife, imagining conversations.
Or having that moment of wonder, seeing a bird land nearby, finding meaning even there.
Tiny moments of transcendence, almost. It illustrates that search for meaning as a powerful human drive, even in the worst conditions.
Now, the sources are also quite balanced in discussing post-traumatic growth. They point out it's a relatively new area of study.
It is. And there are methodological challenges in researching it.
Like relying on people's retrospective self-reports, looking back and maybe seeing things differently.
Exactly. Memory can be tricky, and sometimes people might have a natural desire to see something positive come out of a terrible experience, which could bias their reports. Measuring growth objectively is hard.
And they raise alternative explanations too, right? Like maybe the perceived growth isn't caused directly by grappling with the trauma itself,
but maybe by factors that often follow trauma, like increased social support people receive afterwards. That support could be the real driver of positive change.
Or the idea of positive illusions.
Yeah, the concept that people might adopt overly positive beliefs about themselves or the situation, I'm stronger now, that help them cope in the short term, but might not necessarily reflect deep, lasting, objective change. It's coping, maybe not fundamental growth.
So it's complex. We need to be careful not to oversimplify or romanticize trauma.
Absolutely. But despite these research challenges and nuances, your sources frame post-traumatic growth as a really promising and important area. It helps us understand resilience better.
And the human capacity for positive adaptation, even after profound adversity, it offers hope.
Wow, we've really covered a lot of ground today, haven't we?
We really have, starting with those lightning-fast neural alerts.
The sympathetic system kicking in.
And the sustained hormonal readiness from the endocrine system, the SAM and HPA axis.
Through the specific ways, traumatic experiences can leave a lasting imprint on critical brain regions like the amygdala, hippocampus, ACC.
Helping us understand the persistent challenges of PTSD, those symptoms like hypervigilance and flashbacks.
And finally, exploring that surprising and I think hopeful possibility that for some, the very struggle with trauma can unlock new pathways.
Pathways for strength, connection, and meaning post-traumatic growth.
Yeah.
Our hope really is that by pulling out these key pieces from the material you shared, you feel you have a clearer picture of these incredibly complex biological and psychological responses.
Understanding these systems, even a little better, can offer insights into your own reactions to stress, maybe?
Why some experiences cut so deeply, perhaps?
And also appreciate the incredible potential for adaptation and even growth that seems to be built into the human system.
So, given everything we've discussed today, the automatic biology, the way trauma impacts specific brain circuits, the role of our subjective experience and beliefs, and this potential for growth.
It's a lot to hold together.
It is. Here's a final thought for you to sit with. What does this complex picture suggest about the most effective ways to build resilience in ourselves or support it in others?
Where should the focus be?
Is it primarily about managing the biological response, like learning relaxation techniques? Is it about reframing our mindset and perceptions? Strengthening our social connections? Or is it fundamentally about that deeper search for meaning and purpose in the face of challenge, like Frankl suggested?
Or maybe some combination of all of those.
Probably, but worth thinking about. Keep mulling that over. This has been The Deep Dive.